So what do you think?
I've been hit on by a few guys already. When I see something, they look at me like I'm retarded and say, Gaijin, Gaijin.
You know, if I could hazard a guess, I'd say that clip possibly isn't too far off to what company co-founder Anton Udenstev thought about Japanese culture. Gaijin might be a Hungarian studio that's responsible for the game that's possibly everyone's favorite YouTuber has talked about at some point in their lifetime. But before they stumbled upon that infinite money glitch, they started as humble nerds that made games such as Bunye, Sorvanye Bashny, an adaptation of the Russian cult classic Beamer, Adrenaline Extreme Show, and my personal favorite, Bratva I Kotso, a parody of Lord of the Rings. Now, aside from giving me an excuse to use a clip from one of my favorite animes of all time and exercise my Russian pronunciation, there isn't a lot of history that I could find on Gaijin pre-War Thunder. The best I could manage to scrape up was a few Russian websites, one of which wrote an article on them in 2023, which mostly just features the website feeling itself over how they evaluated Gaijin's games, and less about the developer in question. This leads me to believe that if Gaijin hadn't made War Thunder, they possibly would have ended up like a lot of other European developers that made some of your favorite Eurojank titles. So, allow me to introduce you to more Eurojank, X-Blades, also known as Oni Blade, a project that was apparently so bad that even the sugar-coated and possibly poorly translated words of the website I just mentioned still wouldn't blame you for putting it down. And I'ma be real, that's exactly what I did when I tried this game a few years ago. But today is a different day. I'm hopefully less stupid than I was a few years ago. I just got a tolerance boost from Red Ninja, and since I also want to talk about this game's successor, it'd only be right to discuss it first. Before you even jump into the game, you're met with this over-the-top rock and rap track, which I can only assume is where at least a quarter of this game's budget went toward, because this shit kind of slaps.
Touch the sky, but I'm falling so deep now I realize maybe I was never meant to fly. Instead my wings keep bringing me down. I'm having flashbacks, hoping that I'll never ever hit the...
It's apparently a collaboration between the Italian band Metaphysics and German songwriter Nisam Mizrahi. Metaphysics seems to have been dormant since around 2013, but they do still have a handful of other cuts you can listen to, and Mizrahi still seems active on YouTube. Whoever came up with the idea to get these two artists in the booth to record a menu track for a European anime game, I hope they're still working at Gaijin, because they deserve that infinite money glitch. Actually getting into the game now, you play as Ayumi, a spunky little treasure hunter brimming with confidence who arrives at a lost civilization to obtain an ancient artifact shown to her by a map that she happened to find at some old dude's pawn shop. You can already tell that Ayumi isn't exactly the heroic type. As the old dude is checking out her Indiana Jones hardware, she starts messing around with things that she probably shouldn't. Like, these two don't even exchange words before she inadvertently gets him killed, all because she couldn't keep her hands to herself. She literally double checks to make sure the guy isn't looking at her, and shows zero remorse over his untimely demise that she caused, being more concerned about the fact the item she was just inspecting turned into a map. I'm all for characters making curious mistakes, but what was the precedence for her behavior in this scene? Gaijin either didn't have the budget to record more significant lines for this opening beyond just humming and huffing, or they didn't deem it very necessary to provide a little more context. It's not like we really need to know who the old dude was since he dies like a minute into this opening, but beyond showing me where the map came from, which is pretty much useless in gameplay anyway.
What the hell is even that?
All it tells me is that Ayumi is a bit of a curious dickhead who would rather put her fingerprints all over an object that she doesn't own or understand instead of just asking about it first. So I can't say she's starting off on a good foot here. I'm still okay with this though, because this act first, ask questions later attitude is something that's consistent about her character. It's possibly her only real trait even. evidenced by how much she's constantly grabbing at shit she doesn't understand, even though what she's grabbing at is clearly what's also causing all of her problems. She definitely ain't no Lara Croft, that's for sure. Not only because she's a little blockier than Lara was in the same generation, art style notwithstanding, but also because Lara usually had a good idea of what she was trying to swipe. Here, all Ayumi's opening monologue explains is that some god long ago sealed his power into the object, but she isn't very concerned about what that power may be, or is even aware of the fact that there's apparently 2 of these objects, and is just repeatedly warned that she doesn't know what she's doing by both guardians of said objects and Jay, our deuteragonist. And let me tell you, Jay is definitely one of the deuteragonists of all time.
Of course you got rid of the dark power, but what do you think happened to it? Do you think it simply disappeared with the wind? No!
Listen, calm down. We'll fix it somehow.
No! It has to go somewhere! Leave me alone! You'll be damned!
An absolutely legendary performance. Jay's only purpose here is to give Ayumi something to care about other than herself, which ironically makes her development slightly better than Rei's, even though they both still don't get much of it. As she stated in the opening, she likes to work alone, so the fact that she doesn't immediately see Jay as a rival in the acquisition of these artifacts is technically progress. She mostly just tells him about the curse she sustained from the first one, but he doesn't really ask her about where she got the curse from or what it's doing to her. This could be interpreted as Ayumi hiding this information from him, which is believable for her character, but I'm more inclined to think the fiction just doesn't care about the dark artifact anymore, or else Jay would at least ask where Ayumi contracted her curse from, which is not only pretty important information to know when diagnosing the curse itself, but would also give Ayumi an excuse to lie about it, which would then justify the mistake Jay makes by blowing fairy dust over her, which ends up having an adverse reaction on the curse before skedaddling off. Ayumi can then interpret this as some kind of attempt to screw her out of obtaining the artifacts. While he may have just saved her life, that doesn't necessarily mean she has to instantly trust him to do anything for her.
Oh my god!
None of this happens though, so all this scene tells me is that both of these characters were ignorant of the fact that there's 2 artifacts here, which doesn't exactly make either of them look very intelligent. Either way, when Jay becomes consumed by the dark magic Ayumi releases later on, she finally recognizes that maybe all of this is her fault, and takes it upon herself to help Jay exorcise his demons by basically blasting him with holy hip thrusts. The game can't show you exactly what's going on here due to how sacred this process is, but she's definitely banging the evil out of him.
Be gone, fucks!
This segues us nicely into the gameplay, and let me tell you, if Mitsurugi Kamui Hike is not only a mouthful but also DMC at home, then this game is like DMC at the assisted living facility. This is essentially the entire game. There's maybe only like 3 mechanics you really need to remember. This scale that often shows up at the bottom right of your screen, your rage meter underneath your HP, as well as the diamonds that encompass the outside, and what spells you currently have equipped to your hotbar. You basically just run around, mashing the attack button until you build up a decent sized rage meter, then you press one of your spell buttons to either shoot an elemental projectile, buff yourself, or unleash a devastating AoE move. There is a moderate number of enemies that require you to use specific spells in order to damage them efficiently, but that's about as deep as things go. Even on the hardest difficulty, this game rarely ever requires you to be as efficient as possible during most fights, at least in the sense of dying being a real threat. You're more likely to die of boredom before that happens, constantly spamming the same couple of actions over and over again. Most attacks don't do a lot of damage to Ayumi, but the amount of chain stun enemies can hit you with when they're all gangbanging you at once is pretty obnoxious. The saving grace here is that getting hit gives you rage, and you can cancel just about anything into an AoE spell, including your hit stun. So, as it always goes, Momita.
Momentum!
There are some fights though where enemies aren't giving you a sufficient way to build rage, and while Ayumi can still cast spells without the required amount, it can take much longer to cast when doing so, and she can be hit out of her charging animation. In these cases, red crystals are placed on the map that give Ayumi a full rage bar upon breaking them, and will also respawn after a certain amount of time has passed. This is not the case for the green crystals. They restore HP but don't respawn, so if you ever do start to get low, you can also just go into the menu and buy more health with your surplus of souls, but the cost to do this steadily increases with every purchase and as you play through the game. Souls are also used to buy more spells and upgrades, and you can get them from breaking objects, collecting these little diamonds, or defeating enemies, the last of which will be multiplied by your hit counter, which is a small incentive to avoid taking damage. The only other collectible in the game are these relic pieces. Combining 3 of the same piece will give you a combat upgrade. These are largely pretty useless aside from the small damage bonus these shooting ones give you. I didn't put any practical use into any of the melee ones until I was forced to deal with a tutorial enemy that requires you to kill it with a specific action. This was literally one room before the final boss, which doesn't require you to do this at all. In fact, as far as I know, the final boss is invulnerable to this action. So I'm not even sure why this tutorial was here, besides to maybe just cockblock the player if they didn't bother getting this specific upgrade by the time they reach this point. I don't know, maybe it just unlocks automatically, which would defeat the purpose of collecting the relics associated with it. Why else would they make a feature that, for all intents and purposes, seems completely optional, suddenly mandatory at the very tail end of the game? I'd love to know if anyone did happen to get cucked by this. Leave one in the comments. Anyway, the bar at the bottom right of the screen has 2 functions depending on what type of fight you're in. It either vaguely represents how many monsters you still have left to kill in that area, or is a boss health bar. I say it vaguely represents the former because there are moments where the bar will vanish, but there are still a few enemies left to kill, and other moments where the bar only represents how many times you need to kill a specific enemy in the arena. As far as I can tell, the game doesn't inform you about any sort of difference between when the bar is attached to all of the enemies or just a specific one in the fight. You kinda just walk into a room and start swinging and hope the bar gets to dropping. So there are times where if you aren't killing the right enemy, the game will just hold your progress hostage until you figure it out. But essentially, you just want to lower this bar as you participate in the monster mash until you get the level complete notification, run through the sparkly doorway, sometimes literally, view the results screen, rinse and repeat. While you could argue that's the basic gameplay loop for most action games, I also don't think many games in general are this unapologetically monotonous about their gameplay while also being 7.5 hours long. Honestly, this game shouldn't be any longer than like 3 hours, 4 tops. There just isn't a lot here to really carry it for that amount of time. And that's not even mentioning some of the more frustrating quirks about it, like how enemies are practically made of air. Just doing a running attack into them often catapults them away from Ayumi, practically making the running attack worthless, or how your dodge maneuver is only available when you're locked on and currently shooting something, which usually isn't a huge problem for something like a DMC game, because using the side dodges in those games is usually the last thing you want to be doing anyway. But with how many enemies this game throws at you, it's really not worth locking on unless you know you want to shoot a specific target. Plus, it's not like rolling around constantly like I'm playing a Sonic speedrun makes me feel like I'm actually avoiding damage more reliably, and I'd rather retain my control of the camera with the right stick when I'm shooting. Oh, I'm sorry, she does have a dodge that doesn't require her to lock on and shoot shit. You just have to push her in the direction you want to dodge twice in quick succession and then press the jump button. Yeah, I don't know why there's any evasive maneuvers in this game at all. It's clearly designed to just endlessly gangbang the player. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this happened to be one of the devs' fetish fantasies with just how much of a monster bukkake it is. I'm sure this kind of design appeals to some people, because there is something to be said about how mindless this gameplay is. You don't really have to think, just press buttons and watch the enemies fall over and then get ready to press more buttons. I haven't played a Musou game in a while, but that's essentially how I remember them playing. It's just that those games usually also have more context, the benefit of a beloved IP, and just generally crazier, more bombastic, high-production action happening in them. So, to be completely 100 with you, this is probably one of the worst action games I've ever played. Like, this game functions as my compass for how low an action game can go, short of it being completely broken, because while I didn't run into that many bugs while I was playing it, other than just the generally odd movement physics, there also just isn't anything really redeeming or genuinely interesting about it either. It's It's got a pretty much non-existent world with characters that are about as layered as a roll of gas station toilet paper, level design that's only really concerned about accommodating as many monsters as possible, and functional but repetitive gameplay that doesn't really get any more interesting from hour 1 to hour 7. I mean, when I finished this playthrough, I was expecting to get the bad ending, but I was mashing the spell button so fast that I accidentally skipped it, which is just kind of comical for a game that rewards you for mashing buttons. I didn't even realize it until I went back through the footage. Luckily, all your unlocked FMVs get recorded in the diary, so I still got the ending. But you heard me right, this game has a good and a bad ending. The criteria for which one you get stems from whether or not you purchased any of the dark spells during the first half of the game, and while I did get 2 of them, I never really used them. And I wasn't going to play through another 7 hours again, even on the easy difficulty, for the sake of unlocking an alternate cutscene, just because I was confused about how the powers are supposed to work, so I just looked it up. But trust me, neither ending is very spectacular anyway. You're not really gonna get any more from either of them, or this game in general, than you would just listening to the menu theme. Still, I am glad I did my due diligence and finally played this game to completion, because it'll only help me appreciate its reboot that much more. Hopefully. Or maybe it'll just give me a double dose of Ambien. I don't know. There's a teaser for you. It's just kind of funny that the first game I talk about on this channel that got any semblance of a sequel is also probably the worst one so far, although I suppose Stellar Blade is still pending. I just think it's interesting that all of those other games had sequel bait baked into them, while this game's narrative isn't really as open-ended. It pretty much saved the entire world in this game. It didn't really give itself very many options to raise the stakes narratively, so unless the sequel was going to take a trip to space or something, like a lot of other franchises do when they run out of ideas, a soft reboot does seem like the right play, even if we're just talking about one game here. But it does bring up the question of what Gaijin, and more importantly, any potential publisher saw in X-Blaze to greenlight a sequel. In fact, who did publish the sequel? Well, I guess they've invested in stranger shit back then.